The Belt and Road Initiative, East-West Corridor, North-South Corridor, Blue Dot Network. All of these initiatives have one thing in common, and that is infrastructure and connectivity. In many ways, infrastructure development or connectivity has become the defining element of 21st century geopolitics. As far as Asia is concerned, there has been one institution that has directly contributed to infrastructure development, including in Southeast Asia and the Philippines. I'm talking about the Asian Development Bank, which has been headquartered in the Philippines since the mid-1960s. The international financial institution has made huge contribution to economic development and infrastructure development. And the Asian Development Bank has also been providing very nuanced and very sharp analysis of opportunities and challenges in Asia as far as long-term prospects of economic development is concerned. Today, we have a special guest from the Asian Development Bank. This is someone who understands the region very well and someone who can help us to better understand what is ADB doing in the Philippines and what are the prospects and challenges for the Philippines to make a green infrastructure, a sustainable infrastructure, an inclusive infrastructure for the foreseeable future. Joining us tonight is Ernesto Braam, Alternate Executive Director at the Asian Development Bank. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining us, Ernesto.
Richard, thanks for the invitation.
Pleasure. Can you explain to us what's specifically with the title, right? And then I hope we can also have some time to discuss about the Asian Development Bank and its history. But can we first start with your title? Yeah,
of course. So the Asian Development Bank, the headquarters is here in Manila since 1966 when it was founded. And then you have a board of directors. So I'm a member of the board of directors. And we are actually representatives of the shareholders. So the shareholders are basically the representative of 68 member states of the Asian Development Board. And I'm in what we call a constituency. So we are 7 countries. My constituency, Canada, the Netherlands. I'm from the Netherlands, I'm Dutch. The Nordic countries, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Finland, and Ireland. So we're with 7 in one group, and then we have 2 representatives on the board. We have the executive director, which is a Canadian, because Canada basically pays most money to the Asian Development Bank.
Really?
Yes. Yeah.
I thought it's Japan.
Of our group.
Of the non-Asia, non-Japan.
Of these 7 countries.
I see.
And then the alternate executive director rotates. So now it's the Netherlands, so that's me, and I took over the baton from Finland, and then after me will be Denmark, and so that is the term, alternate executive director. So basically board member.
Ernesto, can you tell us a little bit about what is the job of the board? What is this like a place where big policy decisions are made, or it's like a day-to-day decisions, key decisions are being made? Just for our audience to understand.
Yeah. So the job of the board of directors is to approve or oppose or abstain on proposals put forward by the management and staff of the bank.
Right.
So these are proposals for loans or grants or technical assistance to be provided to the developing countries in the Asia and the Pacific.
And Ernesto, can you tell us a little bit about the background of Asian Development Bank? I think here in the Philippines, we know there's an ADB Avenue. It looks like a big embassy in its own rights, and we hear a lot of great things happening inside, but it's kind of off limit to a lot of us, for a lot of us locals. But we know it's a big institution. Big decisions are being made. It has a lot of resources. We hear a lot of big loans being given here and there, and we'll discuss the Philippine ADB cooperation a bit later on. But can you just give us a little bit of history? Why is the ADB in the Philippines to begin with?
Yeah, so first it was founded in 1966, as I said. So that was during the Cold War era. And actually there were 3 cities that were candidates to have the headquarters of ADB. So there was Tokyo, Tehran in Iran, then under the Shah, still.
Friendly to the West, booming economy.
Yes, indeed, and Manila. And then it was Manila won, basically, this competition for several reasons. I think one, because it's a developing country.
Right.
So it's Asian Development Bank, so it should be in a developing country. But also you have to understand that it was the Cold War. So the Philippines was an ally of the United States. And so all these countries together were friendly countries. And it was an initiative taken by Japan, a very good and constructive initiative. And of course, from the Japanese perspective, also to further enhance relations with the rest of the Asia-Pacific countries.
I mean, given the whole history of Second World War and the tragedies, I think many people would argue that the ADB became a mechanism for Japan to kind of present a different face and win over a lot of its allies and friends. And obviously, Philippines, I mean, I completely agree with you. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, the Philippines in the 50s and early 60s was among the fastest growing emerging markets. So it made perfect sense to be there.
Yeah.
Now, like, how big is ADB in terms of resources, in terms of, I mean, you talk about the group of G7, which you represent, but overall, like, how many countries, is ADB operating in? What is the jurisdiction and coverage? What are we looking at here? Just to give us an idea of the scale of the ADB.
So we have 68 member countries, which includes PRC, People's Republic of China, but actually also Taipei, China, it's called in the
Taiwan,
is also a member because they joined before. Actually, the People's Republic.
1966, of course.
So, as I said, Japan, the United States. Actually, Japan and the United States have equal share.
How many percent are we talking around?
I think it's about 17%, if I'm correct.
Is that a veto-bearing?
No.
Yeah.
Basically, you need a group of countries to support a proposal or oppose a proposal. So practically almost all Asian countries are a member of the Asian Development Bank.
Central Asia, West Asia.
Also, that's interesting what you mentioned, also Central Asia. Yeah. And let's say the furthest away country is Georgia.
Oh, so the Caucasus region.
Close to Europe.
Yeah, Eastern Europe almost.
Yeah. So all these former Soviet republics, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, they are all member of the Asian Development Bank. And then we have, of course, the whole of Southeast Asia as a member, but also Australia and New Zealand. So we have, let's say, regional members, which is the vast majority, so Asian and Pacific countries. Also the Pacific Islands, like Fiji, Northern Pacific Islands, etc. I member. And then we have non-regional countries, so which are the European countries. We have about 15 European countries which are a member of the Asian Development Bank. So not all European countries, but 15.
These are creditors, right? I suppose.
Basically, they paid up. I mean, all the 68 paid up capital.
Oh, so all member countries have
all member
to...
countries.
Oh, I see.
And based on that, you get a certain amount of votes.
Voting share.
Voting share, percentage in that. So that is basically, it has expanded. Some members have joined over the year, particularly after the end of the Cold War. After the fall of the Berlin Wall, as we say it sort of metaphorically, a lot of new countries joined. So now, we don't really have a strictly ideological divide. We are focused on eradication of poverty. So the number one task in the Charter of the Asian Development Bank is eradication of poverty. But throughout the years, because of the growth of the economies,
China, India,
Asia, Southeast Asia, Philippines, we've moved to a next level. So now actually the support is often technical assistance, loans, grants only to the poorest country. So not anymore to the Philippines, because the Philippines, of course,
a middle-income country.
Middle income.
Interesting. So the mandate of ADB has changed as Asia went through a massive economic transformation.
Yes, I wouldn't say the mandate has changed, because we still do poverty eradication. But on top of that,
evolved.
Yes, a number of other things. So if I take the Philippines, for example, and basically the goal of the Asian Development Bank with the Philippines, which is, as we just said, a very long-standing partner of ADB, a client and a partner, is to help the Philippines address poverty, inequality, to help with developing livable cities in the Philippines, combat the impact of climate change, improve governance and institutional capacity in the Philippines, and also to enhance gender equality. These are some of the
Women
goals
empowerment.
in the, specifically with the Philippines, but I would say broader the goals that we have with other developing member countries that are member of the Asian Development Bank.
I have a question here. Thank you very much for clarifying that. That the ADB is changing with the times. Now, because usually when you talk about international financial institutions, the top two that come to the mind, I mean, the usual suspects, right? IMF and the World Bank, and they were very active in this part of the world, including the Green Revolution that helped with food security in the 60s and 70s at the height of Cold War. Where does ADB come into this? I mean, is it a complementary body? Is it a parallel body? Is it a rival for that matter? How does ADB, position itself with all of these other big boys in town?
That's a very good question.
Yeah.
Of course, you have the World Bank, which comes in the UN system, United Nations system, World Bank and IMF. Then you have regional development banks. So we have the Asian Development Bank. There's also an African Development Bank for the African continent. There's the Inter-American Development Bank.
Right.
So that's for Latin America, basically. So you have the regional banks that are more focused on that specific region. So we have, of course, the World Bank is also active, but we have, I would say, maybe a longer and deeper policy dialogue. Now, with each of these Asian countries, including with the Philippines, of course, we have a decades-long policy dialogue.
Right.
So we know each other. We know what are the demands and the challenges of these countries. And to give an example of the Philippines, what we do here, cumulatively, so since the beginning of the Asian Development Bank, we have provided, as Asian ADB, 30 billion US dollars.
Over since 1966?
Yes. Yeah.
30 billion?
Yeah, 30 billion
Wow.
in terms of loans,
technical
assistance, and grants. And if you like, I can give a few
Let's go.
examples.
Let's do it. And let's even talk about the staff of ADB. A lot of them, my classmates back in the day, a lot of them ended up in
I didn't
ADB.
know
Yeah,
that.
let's talk about that.
So I can give you 3 examples, specific examples of
Let's
loans.
talk about ADB Philippines. Yeah.
Last year, we signed actually the largest loan ever to any country within the Asian Pacific to the Philippines, with the Philippines. So I was there as a board member in the Malacanang Palace when we signed it last year, and it amounts to 4.3 billion US dollars. Now this is for building the South Commuter Railway project.
Right.
So that is the railway between Metro Manila and Calamba, about 50 kilometers away. And it will have many positive effects, but 2 to mention is it will cut greenhouse gases emissions because people won't have to take a car, a bus, or whatever. And number 2, and I think that is nice to know for the viewers here in the Philippines, it will cut the travel time by half. Between
that was a very politician kind of pitch. We're gonna be thanks, Secretary of Department of Public Works.
I'm not applying for that. That is one, and then a second.
That's $4 billion.
4.3 billion.
Wow, that project. And sorry for, but this is kind of also related to the Japanese project, right? Because I remember Prime Minister Abe was here back in 2015, and he signed an MOA that had to do also with that project. So it looks like there's a complementarity.
No. This is really
different.
Yeah, this is really a loan by the Asian Development Bank to the Philippines. Yeah. Right. And then second example, if you allow me, is we signed last year what we call a dedicated climate public policy loan. Policy-based loan, PBL we call it. Well, we have lots of jargon. I don't like the jargon.
Yeah, but please explain them, because for normal people, we want to understand.
So this loan, which is 250 million US dollars, is specifically aimed to help the Philippines address the challenges by climate change, basically. So that can be erosion, it can be flood control, irrigation, all kinds of effects, making the Philippines more resilient. So this was actually the first climate loan that we gave to any country.
So again, another first, right?
Yeah,
I mean, biggest, number one is the biggest one on record. The second one is really the pioneer project.
It's a pioneer. So that's
climate adaptation kind of resilience and adaptation.
So specifically focused on climate, because we have many other loans that always have a component of climate in it. We always aim for a certain percentage, whatever, of climate in that, even if a road is built or whatever. But this is is mainly focused on climate. Yeah, and then the third example, which I'm particularly happy with, is the support we give to upgrade and modernize the technical and vocational education and training in the Philippines.
Right.
So, and this is important because this is $100 million loan which we signed last year, and it's important because it will upgrade the skills of graduates in the Philippines that come from polytech schools and vocational training to have a better match with the demands from the market,
Labor markets.
from companies and enterprise employers. So there's a better match. So there's of course already existing, vocational and technical training here, but with this support.
This is with TESDA of the Philippines.
Exactly.
It's with TESDA.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. And it's we should not just focus on the amounts of the loans, and so of course I mentioned them because they're large and good to remember for the viewers. But this comes with a whole package of knowledge transfer and peer-to-peer knowledge transfer and technical assistance and so
capacity building.
That is equally and sometimes even more important than just the loan itself.
So this is like the soft infrastructure. I mean, it's one thing to invest in hardware, but you also want to develop the governance capacity, the technical capacity, and that's extremely important. Thank you. So can we go through the three again, just to remind us? So the number one, the big one is the
South Commuter Railway project
between Manila and Calamba.
Correct.
$4.3 billion.
$4.3 billion US dollars. That is the biggest loan with any country that the ADB has signed in its history.
Right.
So the second one was this climate loan, climate policy-based loan, but let's
the
say
first of its kind again.
Yeah, the first of its kind. For $250 million US dollars, and the third one is the support to the technical and vocational education and training, so to have better match of graduates with the market.
Ernesto, I have a question. Like, are there like best practices models we're looking at? Because like immediately, I'm not telling you because you're Dutch, but usually when you talk about vocational education, like Germany is one of the leading countries. I imagine Netherlands is also among the best. Like, is there like kind of a get the best practices from around the world?
It's also another good question. I think you know more about the ADB than the average person. But that's correct, because we have our, let's say, permanent staff in the ADB, people who work in management, and then consultants are being hired.
Right.
And those consultants are, let's say, from those countries and those organizations that have the expertise. So for example, on this vocational training and let's say internships of students in companies, Germany is a leader.
Yes.
They are very close in that. If I take another example, water management. I'm from the Netherlands, so we have to know about water, otherwise we drown. I mean, we are 50% below sea level, and so water management. A lot of expertise come from the Netherlands. So we just signed, or we just supported the ADB with $20 million US dollars for a water resilience trust fund. So that is a specific fund supported by us with 20 million to go into water management projects, and then linked with climate change. So sea level rise and erosion, and we have lots of water engineers. But also, let's say, this is Asian Development Bank, but also apart from that, as the Netherlands, we have very close relations with the Philippines.
Right.
So we've supported the Philippines with the Manila Bay water resilience
from your
project.
own experience in Netherlands.
Just a bilateral project.
Right.
And I mean, we have long relations, I mean, I think when the first Dutch ship
Go ahead.
arrived here?
Because we just know the British when they temporarily occupied Manila during the 7 Years' War, right? But I think people forget the Dutch.
Yeah, the Dutch didn't occupy.
Yes, last time I checked.
Occupied other parts, but okay, not Manila or the Philippines. No, the first Dutch ship arrived in the Philippines in 1600.
Right.
So that is like more than 400 years ago. And then we set up consular relations about I think more than 160 years ago.
Among the oldest.
Yeah. And then we have 72 years diplomatic relations between the Netherlands and the Philippines. So all of this has led to the fact that we are the third largest investor in the Philippines. I mean, we're a small country. So after the US and Japan, we're the third investor.
And Singapore, I think, is also in top 5 or something like that, right? So like,
yeah,
so it's like you're not the only small, but very influential country.
And another nice thing to know, maybe for the viewers also,
Sure.
is that every day, 300 to 500 Filipino seamen pass through Dutch ports.
Yes, of course.
So our port of Rotterdam in the Netherlands and port of Amsterdam, all the shipping going around.
Speaking of ADB, I mean, I think we can talk about the Netherlands aspect.
No, this is about ADB.
No, but this is interesting. I mean, ADB. How big is the staff? My understanding is that a big chunk of the staff actually comes from locals, right? And like how many thousands are we talking about? And in terms of endowment, how big is ADB? I mean, let's talk dollars, right? Just to put things into perspective, because my sense is this is the biggest regional bank, right? I don't think the counterparts, no offense to in Latin America or others, are as big as the ADB.
No,
we're pretty big, right?
Big, yeah. Because it's a big continent.
Of course.
So we're dealing with
the
big
biggest,
country and then the largest population in the world, and big challenges that we face here in Asia and the Pacific. So in terms of numbers, we have about 3,000 staff here at headquarters, of which 70% are Filipinos. So the Asian Development Bank is also a big provider of jobs for Philippine citizens.
Well-paying jobs.
Well-paid jobs, So that is one thing. Of course, we have offices. We have resident missions in all these Asian countries and Pacific countries. And then talking about numbers. So let's say last year, so now we're in 2023, but last year, 2022, we committed as Asian Development Bank, so let's say our board, including myself, we approved $20.5 billion for loans, grants, technical assistance, guarantees, and equity investments.
Right.
And of this, 20.45 billion, about $4 billion was for the private sector. So we work with governments, but also private sector. And on top of this, $20.5 billion, only last year, not cumulative, only last year committed. On top of that, we managed to mobilize another 11.4 billion in co-financing. So that means financing together from other regional banks or institutions
or development
charities.
agencies.
So together, we work often together with the, let's say, EBRD, which is a European bank.
Right.
And then we both put up money for a loan to a country. Can be to India, Kazakhstan, or Philippines, or whatever. So that is also, I think, an important job of the ADB, because, I mean, $20.5 billion may sound big, but the demands are much bigger.
Of course.
So our job is also to generate and mobilize more funds. So the moment we step into a project, it gives sort of a stamp of approval to it. So, and then private parties also will join, because we help to mitigate, to lower the risk to other lenders and investors.
So you're kind of like a Michelin star, like this is a legit project, maybe you want to, I mean, because that's important, right? Because we know that in the US alone, there could be more than $100 trillion of private fund. But to mobilize that fund, there has to be an imprimatur, right? That's extremely important.
And that is not easy.
That's not easy,
So we see that as a big task, also on climate finance, actually.
Right.
I mean, the Asian Development Bank has committed, last year, it was published, $100 billion to climate change. So, but counting from 2019 to 2030. But on top of that, the goal is to generate more funds to make it interesting for private parties to also invest in measures to fight climate change.
Right. I'm glad that you mentioned that. Now, going back to the Asian Development Bank, you were saying that you also have projects whereby you can work with other international institutions. I mean, can you give us some examples, let's say in the Philippines or ASEAN region, like do you work with, we heard that there could be projects between China-led banks or American-led initiatives or ADB. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
That happens, of course.
Or JICA.
JICA is a big player,
Japan,
of course. The Japanese development agency, of course, and they provide also loans and grants and sometimes technical assistance. The ADB works sometimes with the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank
In Beijing.
AIIB, of which a number of European countries are including the Netherlands. So there are different partners. As I said, the EBRD also works with the ADB. And often the ADB, because we have these resident missions, which are well staffed with highly qualified people.
Yeah.
I mean, when I joined the board, which is like 1 year and going to 2 years.
Right.
I was really very, very happy to see so many experts. I mean, It's amazing. I mean, the staff I mentioned here, but also in the resident missions. We have really top-notch experts on roads, on urban development, on water management, on food security. So that is, it's really very stimulating to work in such an environment.
Kind of like a wisdom house almost, right? Everyone is a switched on expert in their own field. So I could see your excitement about,
And that is important also because we are making a transition. We used to be only in infrastructure bank. Only financing ports and roads and irrigation. But now we're also going to be a climate bank. So that is with this 100
Green
billion.
bank.
A climate bank, we call it. And also a knowledge bank we want to be. So also to cooperate on knowledge and to exchange knowledge. So the ADB has signed MOUs with different universities in the world. And quite recently, and I'm proud to say that, with Leiden University in the Netherlands, which you visited, the city of Leiden, 2017. So memorandum of understanding was signed with Leiden University. And Leiden University has a sort of triangular cooperation with Delft University, which is very strong on water management and engineering, and with Erasmus University in Rotterdam, which is on the business side.
Of course.
So they signed that to work with, provide knowledge to ADB on water management, urban development, which is very important with congested cities, Manila, and taxation also. Because what we find important is we support countries to improve, but they should also
raise their funds.
Raise their own taxation, which you call domestic resource mobilization. So we help with expertise on taxation, how to do it in a fair way, and that also some groups in the country don't escape from paying taxes. So but I still remember when you came to Holland. In the winter.
I think there's a lot that we can learn from the case of the Netherlands because of the whole range of expertise you have. And I think Asian Development Bank is actually a global bank if you look at it. And I'm glad that you also emphasize it wants to be a knowledge bank, because for a lot of us journalists and experts from outside, we read ADB studies, including from the think tank in Japan, for instance, where they talk about I remember 5-6 years ago, it was ADB that really highlighted how serious the infrastructure spending deficit is in the region. We're talking about close to $1 trillion, Philippines $11 billion annually. So I think that's where there was more and more impetus towards different infrastructure development initiatives, which we'll discuss very shortly on the global level. But just while we're in the Philippines, what are the general lessons perhaps over the past few decades of working in the Philippines, and what are the long-term projects and kind of trajectory that ADB is looking in its partnership with the Philippines? Because I remember very well, there was a lot of interesting intellectual debates within ADB of the importance, for instance, of the agricultural sector as a kind of a backbone of manufacturing. Because I think one of the problems we have had in the Philippines is that we're overly services driven, and it's not high-end services a la Australia or Japan. And the idea is that we really have to boost the agriculture sector together with the manufacturing sector for more inclusive development. So even before you even went to the ADB, a lot of us were paying attention to brilliant studies that were coming out of the ADB. So that's why I was wondering, as someone who's at the upper echelons of ADB, what is your understanding of the lessons from working with the Philippines, and what are the ways to move forward, positive ways of even making better out of this country?
Of course. I mean, I'm not an expert on this because we have a resident mission specifically dedicated to the Philippines with very excellent staff. So they're also based in headquarters, but they're the resident mission for the Philippines. I mean, what I see personally not being an expert.
Yeah. This is in your personal capacity.
Yeah, of course.
Just to be clear.
Everything is my personal capacity.
Yeah, just
I
to be
don't
clear.
speak on behalf of the Asian Development Bank, just personally. What I see is that, I mean, there's a couple of issues, of course, in the Philippines, which it shares with other countries in Southeast Asia, and some are maybe more unique to the Philippines.
Sure.
I mean, one, I think, is an issue of logistics.
Sure.
Because the Philippines is an archipelago.
Yeah.
So it comes with certain challenges of connectivity between the islands. So that sort of has a upward pressure on prices, because transportation can be expensive, particularly now with fuel and prices are up.
Freight costs.
So that is one issue. I think also a sort of, but that is not only the Philippines, I think it's more global.
Yep.
A sort of reassessment of, let's say, agriculture. I think for a long time, and this is a global issue, all money was put on industrialization in many countries, in Africa and elsewhere, neglecting agriculture. And I don't say that happened in the Philippines, but that's a sort of an overall thing to sort of...
it's a pattern,
reappreciate the importance of the agriculture sector and food security. Because we saw what happened during the COVID pandemic, when supply chains were cut.
And the Ukraine conflict, which also affected...
with the Russian invasion in Ukraine. Added to that is that we see how vulnerable these supply chains can be.
Right.
So it's very important that countries also focus on their food security. So the Asian Development Bank has committed to provide to all Asia Pacific $14 billion for food security in a
this
time
is
span
like
of 5
recently
years.
this food security initiative.
Yes. This is
2023,
2022, 2023. Yeah.
Right.
But it will cover a number of years.
Right.
And that was a specific demand which I fully support from the developing member countries. So we are very much focusing on climate change, food security, and of course the nexus. Climate change, food security, and even water management and other issues is very important. So, but what we see is with the Philippines and with other countries, we moving to more a multi-sectoral approach. So not just building one road and make sure it's well kept and maintenance and there's sufficient funds for it and whatever. Important to connect particularly the countryside, rural areas with cities, with markets and so, but more integrated in urban development, transportation, even gender issues are important. So we make sure that in road construction also a certain number of women are involved in these quite traditional, male sectors.
So it's a multi-stakeholder, full spectrum development. It's a package. You corollary sectors, all of them.
And we have country partnership strategies with each country, each member state, each developing member state. So also one with the Philippines. And the new ones that are closed, they're normally for 5 years or so, are more sophisticated. So less purely infrastructure.
Right, so the knowledge aspect, capacity building, technical
and more integrated, water management with urban development, with taxation and roads.
And then definitely the climate change aspect is big, right? I think 7 out of 10 most vulnerable countries to climate change, based on several studies, I think HSBC was just one of them, are in the Asia Development Bank jurisdiction, right? I mean, that's quite serious.
Yeah, we're talking huge number of people that are affected by climate change here in Asia and the Pacific. And I visited the Northern Pacific island states in March.
What are these countries, just for the purposes of our Northern Pacific? What are we looking at?
So then we're talking about the Marshall Islands.
Marshall Islands, okay.
We're talking about Micronesia, Federation of Micronesian States, and we're talking about Palau.
Who made big speeches at the United Nations and the global, climate, regimes, right?
Exactly. So let's say 3 times a year, a group of board members visits a specific countries, 1 or 2 countries.
Right.
So this was the Pacific Island states we visited, and there you can see directly. I saw with my own eyes the impact of climate change.
Right.
Because the Marshall Islands particularly is just 1 meter
Oh,
above sea level.
that's
So it's really, really very tricky.
Yeah.
And you can already see that these are atolls. So islands connected with land, and during high tide, sort of-
submerged.
the road disappears. But with climate change,
Yeah.
the roads will disappear permanently. So ADB is trying to help them
Right.
with becoming more resilient.
Adaptation.
Adaptation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course with mitigation too, right? As you help build green infrastructure.
Yeah. Of course, they are not large pollutant. I mean, the Pacific Islands, they have the negative impact of climate change, but they don't contribute to climate change.
Hence the
They
climate
hardly
justice
have any
conversation.
emissions, you know.
And I was more referring to like ADB helping the polluting countries to, not to make the situation worse for, Palau and the Marshall Islands of this
as our
world.
president of the ADB, President Asakawa, has said, the battle against climate change will be won or lost in Asia Pacific.
Right. Yeah. Right. That's a very, very important note to say. Thank you so much for giving us an overview at least of the ADB Philippine cooperation and also the new emerging areas of focus for ADB. Now, if you zoom out, particularly in the past decade, we see the emergence of different initiatives. I think the BRI is celebrating its 10th anniversary this year. And people are discussing whether we're in a BRI 3.0 situation already as they refine it and improving it and become more realistic perhaps with their plans. The United States came also with its own Indo-Pacific Economic Framework initiative, although many people have jokingly say it's more like ASEAN initiatives, like more principles than substance. But you also have other initiatives like the Blue Dot Network, Japan, Australia, and the United States. We also saw with the G7, the Build Back Better World initiative. Then there's the EU, Japan Connectivity Initiative. There's so much going on there, right? So obviously ADB is operating within a bigger constellation. What is your understanding of this? Is this just hot takes? Is this just hot air? Is this just something, there's a recognition that there's so much need that everyone has to mobilize? Because my understanding is infrastructure development is like the new kind of like a nexus of geopolitics, right? Like if you want to be a big country, you have to have some sort of initiative. India has its own East-West corridor. China has its own BRI. What is your understanding of this big picture and how ADB is kind of making sure it makes the most out of it to also push for its own development projects in the region?
Well, first, you mentioned the word geopolitics.
Yeah.
So we try to keep geopolitics outside of the ADB.
Sure.
Of course, we have to be realistic. I mean, there's a geopolitical context, around it. But we try to keep it out because we all try to have our noses in the same direction with all these member states. I mean, the US, China, Japan, Korea, European countries, India, Australia are a member. So on geopolitics, they may differ, but on developing Asia and the Pacific Islands, we have the same goal, basically. But let's say talk outside of the Asian Development Bank. I mean, and also, of course, on my personal, account.
Yeah, because you're also a diplomat and you have been following these issues. Also in your own personal capacity, what is your understanding of these different initiatives?
I think there are, a few different levels and perspectives. Number one, there's a great demand for investment in infrastructure. Beyond doubt, there's huge demand for that.
Trillions. I mean, we're talking about trillions.
We're talking about trillions. So it is important that there are investments in that. So we had the Belt and Road Initiative from China, and then as a response to that, we saw the Global Gateway.
Global Gateway. I wanted
the European Union.
Yes. Thank you for mentioning
actually, before coming to Manila in this job as a board member, I was our connectivity envoy
for the Netherlands.
For the Netherlands, So
that makes sense.
Many meetings online because it was during COVID with my EU colleagues, and with a couple of countries we were pushing actually for this Global Gateway initiative on connectivity. So it's sort of a response to Belt and Road Initiative, but it also stands on its own. It's global, so it's not just Europe and Asia, but also Europe and Africa. And the goal is to get investments, to mobilize investments Actually, the goal is to mobilize 300 billion euros investment for infrastructure and to have good quality investment. So that is the global gateway, and we have digital connectivity, we have transportation, we have health, so we have different aspects there. And digital, of course, is a very important one.
Course,
We shouldn't overlook that. The EU also has connectivity partnerships with Japan, with India, with ASEAN.
Right.
And then to come to the Blue Dot network that you mentioned, which was launched under the Trump administration. And it is an interesting, I think, initiative. It's US, Australia, Japan. And they want to do certification
Michelin
star,
exactly,
of infrastructure projects. So basically,
it's green, it's sustainable, it's fiscally.
So we support that. I think investment in infrastructure, we can't get enough of it because there's such a large demand. However, what we feel, and that is EU, I'm not talking about the ADB, the Netherlands, is that if you invest in infrastructure, let's say cross-border infrastructure, you should sit around the table and see, the recipient of the investment, if it's in their interest.
Right.
You don't build a high-speed railway
to nowhere.
That is not of their interest.
Yeah.
In Southeast Asia, for example, it's in the interest of Southeast Asia to have, let's say, these east-west railway connections, so connecting Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, etc., etc. It's in the interest. So so that is what I want to say. About that.
Thank you. I really appreciate. Again, I know you're speaking in your personal capacity. We didn't want to bring in the geopolitics. What are the things that make you feel optimistic about the direction of this global infrastructure initiatives, like the learning curve, the adjustments, the appreciation of the realities of climate change from your own experience, not only as a diplomat, but also someone who's working with the ADB right now, or seeing things that are giving you, like the green shoots, what are there?
We live in a globalized world. So connectivity, is good. It connects each other, and we understand each other better, for that. So we see some polarization in the world, but we also see people getting closer together. So this global gateway of the EU actually brought European countries closer together. And now our companies, let's say a Dutch company and a German or French company, can work together in an infrastructure project, let's say in a third country, in an Asian country or in an African country or wherever. So I think we align our interests, and I think coming together and a competition is not a bad thing. If it's done in a healthy and transparent way. And we believe very strongly, particularly as a Dutch person, in a level playing field.
Yes.
Because we feel
fair competition.
If there's a level playing field, no government interference, not too much, our companies can do well, But of course, some countries support their
more protectionist. Right. Last note, we can go on and on discussing about this, but I know you're a bibliophile. You read a lot. Are there things that you recommend our audience to read to understand maybe ADB's project here? Are there studies or to understand the emerging global landscape when it comes to development? Are there like some recent books you have read or books you have read in the past 10 years that for anyone who's interested maybe to get involved in ADB, work in ADB, or get involved in the development field?
Well, on ADB, we have a website, of course.
Right.
So www.adb.org. So there's a wealth of information there. Of course. So you can go there. And I would recommend just to go there and surf a little bit. Both for young people, students, school kids, can go there and get good subjects for, to write a paper or whatever and get high marks in school. Or grown-ups or business people or whatever can go there. In terms of books, I have a couple of books that made a big impression on me. One is Connectography by Parag Khanna. A brilliant guy. He's Indian national, but he's based in Singapore. So I met him when I was working in Singapore for 5 years. My job was sort of in-house think tank there. And he focuses on different ways how the world are connected. And he made fantastic charts and so in that book. So I recommend that book. There's other books. I mean, there's this book by Harari.
Right.
Yuval Noah Harari, Sapiens, which basically focus on where do we come from as human beings. And that makes us understand that we have more in common than divides us.
Right.
You know, and
how far we came. We used to be just like a bunch of apes, right?
Yeah,
then look at what we have done now, you know, like how far we have come.
And we came this far because we work together.
Cooperation,
You know, so I'm an optimist by nature.
Right.
So, of course, there's tensions now. I mean, there's trade tensions, there are political tensions, unfortunately, and we have a war in Europe, with the Russian invasion in Ukraine. So, you also have to be realistic. But in the end, I think that if we have more contacts between different nationalities, cultures, religions, we understand each other better, you know, and then we understand that we all have the same goal, you know. I mean, families, is it in, you know, Baguio, or in Cebu, or in Davao, or in Amsterdam. I mean, families all share the same thing, you know. They want the best for their kids. They want to have a roof over their head. They want to have a meal on the table. They want to have good education for their kids. So that's what we share. So that's why, I believe that we will make progress, but there will be many hiccups, of course. So we have to be realistic, and we also have to be prepared for that. So, because in the past, I think sometimes we European countries have been a bit naive in terms of our technology sharing and things like that. But the ADB, I think, is a
You mean in terms of making sure the technology transfer jives with the social context and the governance infrastructure?
And it is not monopolized, you know? And also protect intellectual property,
rights,
of course, of that. But I think the Asian Development Bank is a big, ambitious project for progress, you know?
And productive and constructive, literally.
Yes, it is. And I'm learning a lot every day. I mean, now I talk like I know a lot about it, but it was a steep learning curve when I joined the bank.
On that note, thank you very much, Ernesto, for joining us.
Thanks very much,
Looking forward to more conversations like this. Catch us again next week here on One News. You can also check out the long conversation on Spotify, YouTube, and Google Podcasts. I'm Richard Hidarian, and that is The View from Manila, where One News, all sides, all the time.